It's October 2019, and a man named Harrison Keely is settling into his sleeping car compartment on the Silver Meteor, getting ready for the overnight run from New York to Miami. He's taken this train before, many times actually, and he's looking forward to the part of the journey that he loves most. Dinner in the dining car, the white tablecloth, the heavy silverware, sitting across from strangers and swapping stories while the countryside rolls past the window. He's been doing this for years. It's the reason he takes the train instead of flying. But when he walks into the dining car that evening, something is wrong. The tables are gone. The linens are gone. There's a attendant standing there with a plastic container, and inside that container is his dinner, pre-packaged, reheated. I hand it to him like he's picking up takeout from a fast food restaurant. The attendant tells him he can eat it in his room, or in what they're now calling the flexible dining lounge. Harrison looks around at the other passengers, and they all have the same expression on their faces: confusion, disappointment, like someone just told them the party was canceled. And the thing is, Harrison Keely wasn't some kind of railroad romantic living in the past. He understood that times change. He understood that businesses have to make money. But standing there in that dining car with a plastic box in his hand, he couldn't help feeling like something had been taken from him, something that had been part of American train travel for over 150 years. And he wasn't wrong, because something had been taken. The question is why? And the easy answer is money. The dining car was losing too much money, so they got rid of it. And that's true as far as it goes. But here's where the story gets interesting, because dining cars have always lost money. From the very first day that George Pullman put a kitchen on wheels back in 1868, the dining car has been a money-losing operation. The railroads knew it. The accountants knew it. Everyone in the industry understood that you couldn't serve a steak dinner on a moving train and expect to turn a profit. And yet, for over a century, they kept doing it anyway. So what changed? Why did something that was acceptable for 100 years suddenly become unacceptable? The answer to that question takes you through the golden age of American railroading, through the decline of the passenger train, all through congressional hearings and federal mandates, and ultimately to a man named Richard Anderson who came from the airline industry and decided to run Amtrak like it was Delta. But the real answer, the one that nobody wants to talk about, is that we broke something that was never meant to be fixed. We tried to make the dining car profitable, and in doing so, we destroyed the very thing that made it worth having in the first place. To understand what we lost, you have to understand what the dining car used to be. And the best place to start is with a guy named Fred Harvey, who figured out something in 1876 that would change American travel forever. Harvey was running restaurants along the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway, and he had a problem. Train passengers were used to eating terrible food. The station restaurants of that era were notorious for serving slop that would make a prison cafeteria look like fine dining, and they charged outrageous prices because they knew the passengers had no other option. Harvey looked at this situation and saw an opportunity. What if he could serve genuinely good food at reasonable prices with impeccable service? What if he could make the meal itself a reason to take the train? So that's exactly what he did. He built a chain of restaurants and dining cars that became legendary for their quality. By 1901, Harvey had 45 restaurants and over a dozen dining cars operating across the American West, and people would actually plan their trips around eating at a Harvey house. The man was serving fresh trout pulled from mountain streams that morning, steaks that would put a Kansas City chop house to shame, and desserts that travelers would write letters home about. Harvey was building something that had never existed before, a national restaurant chain with consistent quality from Chicago to Los Angeles. And then there was the Super Chief. If you want to understand what American railroad dining was capable of at its peak, you have to understand this train. The Santa Fe launched it in 1936 as the most luxurious train in America, running between Chicago and Los Angeles in just under 40 hours. They called it the Train of the Stars because half of Hollywood seemed to ride it. Frank Sinatra, Elizabeth Taylor, Richard Burton. These people could afford to fly, but they chose the Super Chief because the experience was worth the extra time. The crown jewel of the Super Chief was something called the Turquoise Room. It was a private dining room, the only one of its kind on rails anywhere in the world, seating just 12 guests at a time. The walls were decorated with authentic Native American art. The china was custom made. The menu featured things like beluga caviar and 18-ounce Kansas City steak that the chef would prepare exactly to your specification. When you finished your meal, they brought out finger bowls with rose petals floating in the water. Finger bowl on a train. Now, here's the thing that most people don't realize about all of this luxury. The railroads weren't making money on it. The Pennsylvania Railroad ran the numbers in 1937 and found that every meal they served cost them about 37 cents more than they charged for it. And that doesn't sound like much until you multiply it by hundreds of thousands of meals per year. By 1949, the The Pennsylvania was losing $4 million annually just on food service, and by 1957, the entire American railroad industry was losing $29 million a year on dining cars. So why did they keep doing it? Because the dining car was never supposed to make money. It was what the business people call a loss leader. You take a loss on one thing so you can make money on something else. The railroads made their real money hauling freight and mail. Passenger service was important for publicity and prestige, and the dining car was the showpiece that made people want to ride the train in the first place. If you served someone an incredible meal while they watched the Rocky Mountains roll past their window, they'd tell their friends about it. They'd book another trip. They'd pay premium prices for the sleeping car compartment because the whole experience was worth it. The dining car didn't have to make money. It just had to make people want to ride the train. But then the world changed, and it changed fast. The airlines started offering coast-to-coast service that could get you from New York to Los Angeles in hours instead of days. The interstate highway system made it possible to drive anywhere you wanted to go, and the business traveler, the ones who used to fill those premium sleeping car compartments and order the expensive dinners, started flying instead. The railroads tried to compete, but the math was brutal. A dining car required a crew of 10 or 12 people to operate. You had 4 or 5 cooks working in a kitchen roughly 8 feet wide and 18 feet long, plus 6 waiters, plus a steward to manage the whole operation. A sleeping car, by comparison, needed 1 porter. The labor costs alone made dining cars prohibitively expensive, and as passenger numbers declined, those costs became harder and harder to justify. One by one, the great American railroads started cutting back. The elaborate menus got simpler. The fresh ingredients got replaced with frozen. The china and silver gave way to disposable plates and plastic utensils. By the time Amtrak took over intercity passenger rail service on May 1st, 1971, the dining car had already been in decline for 20 years. And here's where the fundamental problem comes in. The Amtrak was created to take over passenger rail service from 20 bankrupt private railroads. The government gave it a mandate to provide a national passenger rail network. But unlike those old private railroads, Amtrak doesn't haul freight. It doesn't carry mail. Its entire revenue comes from passenger, which means that loss leader strategy that had worked for 100 years, suddenly it doesn't work anymore. When the Pennsylvania Railroad lost money on its dining cars in 1937, it could absorb that loss because it was making massive profits hauling steel and coal and manufactured goods. Amtrak doesn't have that option. Every dollar it loses on the dining car is a dollar it has to ask Congress to replace. And Congress, as it turns out, has some very strong opinions about how Amtrak should be spending its money. In 1981, the Congress decided that Amtrak needed to break even on its food and beverage service. Just think about that for a second. For over 100 years, every railroad in America had understood that the dining car was supposed to lose money. It was part of the business model. But now, Congress was telling Amtrak to do something that had never been done in the entire history of American railroading. The pressure kept building over the decade. In 2012, Representative John Mica held a hearing that got a lot of media attention because of one specific number. He pointed out that Amtrak had lost $833 million on food service over the previous 10 years, and then he broke it down into individual items that made for great headline. A hamburger that cost passengers $9.50 actually cost Amtrak $16.15 to produce. That's a loss of $6.65 on every single hamburger. A can of Pepsi that sells for $2 costs Amtrak $3.40 when you factor in all the labor and equipment. Now, those numbers are real, and they do sound ridiculous when you put them that way. But here's what nobody mentioned in that hearing. 99% of those losses came from the long-distance dining car. The cafe cars on the short-haul trains actually break even or turn a small profit. And those long-distance dining cars, they're attached to trains that serve route, where there's literally no other option for passengers to get food during a journey that might last 2 or 3 days. You can't exactly pull over at a McDonald's when you're crossing the Nevada desert, but Congress wasn't interested in those nuances. In 2015, they passed the FAST Act, which mandated that Amtrak develop a plan to eliminate food service losses within 5 years. And in 2017, they strengthened that mandate even further. The message was clear. Figure out how to make the dining car profitable, or get rid of it. And then Richard Anderson showed up. If you want to understand what happened to Amtrak dining car, you need to understand this man, because his background explains almost everything. Anderson was born in Galveston, Texas in 1955. And here's the irony that would be funny if it wasn't so tragic. His father worked for the Santa Fe Railway, the same railroad that operated the Super Chief, the same railroad that ran the Harvey House restaurants. Richard Anderson grew up in a railroad family, and then he spent his entire career in the airline industry, learning how to cut costs and eliminate services that that didn't turn a profit. He ran Northwest Airlines from 2001 to 2004, during which time he eliminated 17,000 jobs and demanded $1 billion in concessions from the union. Then, he became CEO of Delta Airlines. This is the man that Amtrak Board of Directors chose to lead the National Passenger Rail Corporation. In June of 2017, Anderson came in with what people inside Amtrak called an airline mentality. He looked at the dining car and saw exactly what a bean counter would see: a service that loses money, a crew that costs too much, food that could be prepared more cheaply somewhere else. So on June 1st, 2018, Amtrak announced that it was eliminating traditional dining service on the Capital Limited and the Lakeshore Limited. The freshly prepared meals were gone. The white tablecloths were gone. In their place, passengers would receive what Amtrak called contemporary dining, which was a polite way of saying boxed meals prepared off-site and reheated on the train. The reaction was immediate and furious. Passengers complained that the food was terrible. They complained that the experience of eating in the dining car had been destroyed. They complained that they were paying sleeping car prices for coach-class meal. But Amtrak pressed forward. By October 2019, the flexible dining concept had been expanded to the Crescent, the Silver Meteor, the City of New Orleans, the Cardinal, and the Silver Star. The traditional dining car, the one that Fred Harvey had perfected and the Super Chief had elevated to an art form, was being systematically dismantled. Here's what flexible dining actually means, in case you're wondering. Instead of a chef preparing your eggs to order in the morning, you get a continental breakfast buffet with muffins and yogurt and hard-boiled eggs that were cooked somewhere else and shipped to the train in a plastic container. Instead of a steak grilled to your preference at dinner, you get a pre-packaged entree like Asian noodle bowl or red wine braised beef that gets reheated in what's essentially a sophisticated microwave. But the biggest loss isn't the food itself, it's the experience that went with it. One of the things that made dining car travel special was the community seating. You'd sit down with strangers, people you'd never met before, and by the end of the meal, you'd have heard their life story, where they were going, why they were taking the train. There's a reason Harrison Keely kept coming back to the Silver Meteor year after year. It was those conversations, those connections with people he would never have met otherwise. Flexible dining eliminates all of that. You pick up your pre-packaged meal and take it back to your room, or you eat it in what Amtrak calls an exclusive lounge that doesn't have the same communal atmosphere. The whole social fabric of the dining car experience just disappeared. Representative Steve Cohen of Tennessee stood up in Congress in November 2019 and talked about what had been lost. He remembered taking the train from Memphis to Chicago as a child, eating in the dining car with his family. He remembered the French toast. He remembered the filet mignon, which he described as the thickest and finest he'd ever eaten. And he asked the Amtrak executives to consider the humanity, the romance, and the appeal of train travel with food. He wasn't just complaining about the quality of the meal. He was mourning the loss of something that couldn't be measured in dollars and cents. And here's where we get to the heart of the matter, the thing that nobody seems willing to say out loud. The congressional mandate to make Amtrak food service profitable was never going to work because it was asking Amtrak to do something that contradicts the fundamental nature of what a dining car is supposed to be. Remember what I said earlier about the loss leader model? The dining car only made sense when it was part of a larger system that could absorb its losses. The private railroads could afford to lose money on food because they made money on freight. Amtrak doesn't have that luxury, but Congress keeps demanding that Amtrak operate the dining car like it's a standalone business, like it's supposed to turn a profit on its own. And you simply cannot do that while maintaining any reasonable level of quality or service. Joe Boardman, who was Amtrak's president from 2008 to 2016, understood this perfectly. He told Congress that if Amtrak eliminated dining cars entirely, they would lose $93 million in ticket revenue because the dining car isn't just about the food. It's about the experience. It's about the reason people choose to take a 2-day train trip instead of a 4-hour flight. You take away that experience and you take away the reason for the train to exist in the first place. But that's exactly what happened. The flexible dining initiative was projected to save about $2 million a year. $2 million. Meanwhile, Amtrak had just taken delivery of a fleet of brand new Viewliner 2 dining cars that cost $298 million. These beautiful cars, with their unique double windows and their full-service kitchen, sat idle in rail yards while passengers on the eastern routes ate pre-packaged meals out of plastic containers. One railway columnist wrote something that stuck with me. He said that as long as Amtrak hires managers who formerly worked for the airline industry, the dining car food will be something like what you get on a 767. And he was right. Because the people running Amtrak don't understand what made the dining car valuable in the first place. They see it as a cost center that needs to be optimized, not as the soul of the long-distance train experience. Anderson left Amtrak in 2020, but the damage was done. The flexible dining model is still in place on the Eastern long-distance route, the Capital Limited, the Lakeshore Limited, the Cardinal, the City of New Orleans, the Crescent. All of them still serve those pre-packaged meals that passengers have learned to dread. There's been some pushback. The Western routes still have traditional dining, with onboard chefs preparing meals to order. The California Zephyr, the Coast Starlight, the Empire Builder, the Southwest Chief. If you want the old-school dining car experience, you can still get it, but you have to choose your route carefully. But the fundamental problem remains. Congress still expects Amtrak to minimize losses on food service. Amtrak still doesn't have any revenue source other than passenger and the long-distance train. The ones that actually need dining cars because the journeys are too long to go without food are still treated as embarrassments that need to be fixed rather than assets that need to be supported. David Peter Allen, who works with the Lackawanna Coalition Advocacy Group, said something that I think gets to the heart of what's really going on. He said that the ideological benefits of phasing out long-distance train appear to be a worthwhile price for some people. In other words, there are people in positions of power who simply don't believe that passenger rail should exist in America, and degrading the dining car experience is a very effective way of discouraging riders without having to officially cancel the train. So here's where we stand. The dining car isn't gone, but it's been diminished in ways that would have been unthinkable 50 years ago. The Super Chief's Turquoise Room, with its finger bowls and its 18-ounce steak, exists now only in photographs and memory. Fred Harvey's vision of making the meal itself a reason to travel has been replaced by pre-packaged entrees that you eat alone in your compartment while watching videos on your phone. And the strangest part is that everyone involved seems to understand what's been lost. The passengers know, the employees know, even the executives know, or at least they should. But the system keeps grinding forward anyway. Yeah, because the mandate from Congress is clear and the math doesn't add up, and nobody has figured out how to make a dining car profitable without destroying everything that makes it worth having. Harrison Keely is still out there somewhere, probably still taking trains when he can, probably still hoping that someday he'll walk into a dining car and find it the way it used to be. White tablecloth, heavy silverware, strangers becoming friends over a meal that someone actually cooked right there on the train. Maybe someday that will happen. Maybe someone will figure out that the value of the dining car can't be measured in hamburger losses and soda margin. But right now, tonight, there's a train somewhere in America rolling through the darkness, and the people in the sleeping cars are eating reheated beef out of plastic containers. No, and the dining car that used to be the heart of the experience is just another quiet space where the conversation is stopped. The whistle still blows, the train still runs, but something is missing, and everyone knows it.